The last words she said to me lingered in the air like a breath I couldn't catch. "You're not going on the trip." I didn't argue, didn't push back, just let her leave. By the time the sun set, I had erased everything. My presence was gone, and with it, the life I thought I had. But when they come back, everything will feel the same, only I won't be there. The quiet life of a man in his mid-30s, married for 8 years, is disrupted by a single sentence from his wife. She's planning a trip, and he is no longer part of it. The couple has built a routine, a family, a life, but somehow, in a single moment, it all feels fragile. He doesn't fight her, doesn't protest. Instead, he takes his silence as a signal, a moment to do something he's never had the courage to. He decides to erase everything, possessions, memories, even the life they built together. He leaves without a trace. When they return, they will find their lives the same, yet everything will have changed. The kitchen was quiet, but the hum of the refrigerator filled the space in between. I watched the steam rise from my cup of coffee, its warmth curling into the cold air of the early morning. The window was half open, the curtains still, though the light outside was soft and like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she moved, a small, familiar sound that never meant anything until now. She was putting the bread away, the one she always bought on Sundays. I could see her back, her shoulders a little slumped, but I didn't say anything. The silence between us had already become too thick to cut through. She didn't turn around, not even when she spoke. "I'm leaving," she said. Her words hung in the air, barely breaking the stillness. It wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't look at me. Her voice was flat, tired even, like she was saying it out of necessity, not choice. I had expected this somewhere deep inside, but hearing it still felt like being shoved underwater. The weight of it sank into my chest, thick, slow. I held the cup in my hands tighter than I should have. The rim pressed into my palms, but the heat from the coffee didn't reach my skin. There was a moment right before I spoke when I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could hear was the sound of her hands folding the bread wrapper, the way she moved around the kitchen. There was no fight in her words, no anger, just emptiness. Yeah, she wasn't asking for permission, and she wasn't even explaining why. She just said it. "I'm going with the kids, on a trip. You're not coming." I wanted to say something to make her feel what I felt, but I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to fight. I wasn't part of the plan anymore. I wasn't in her story, not even in the footnotes. The silence stretched thin like it could break if I touched it wrong. I set the cup down on the counter, and she kept moving. She didn't wait for my response. She just went about her business, like it didn't matter if I was listening or not. The door clicked shut behind her as she left. The weight in my chest didn't move. It stayed. It stayed for a long time. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. I felt the weight of the house press in on me like it knew things I didn't. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the kitchen, but it felt too light to reach me now. It felt too far. I could hear her car start outside. I watched the window, the one she always looked out of when she was waiting for the kids to get in the car. But today, it was empty, and I didn't feel the urge to stop her. I didn't feel the urge to ask her to stay, to ask her to look at me again. Was that how it was? Was it that simple? She just left, and I let her. I didn't stop her. I didn't reach out. I didn't say anything. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The smell of bread, coffee, and dust filled the air, but I couldn't connect with it. It felt like I was just passing through. I walked through the house, my footsteps quiet against the floorboards. The air seemed empty, and the shadows stretched longer than usual. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was thick with everything we hadn't said, with everything I had left unsaid. I passed the kids' rooms. Their doors were half open, the beds still made, their toys left scattered on the floor. There was no laughter. No rush to get to school, no messes to clean up, just silence. And I stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorframe. The walls, the house was quieter now, stiller than it had ever been. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a soft, low vibration that used to be background noise, but now it felt like an interruption. I sat on the couch for a while, my hands resting in my lap, staring at the empty hallway. The light from the window was soft, filtering through the blinds in lazy stripes. The shadows stretched long across the floor, but everything felt vacant, like the house had been emptied out, and I was the only thing left in it. I thought about getting up, doing something, anything, but I stayed. It felt like the air had thickened, like the walls had taken on a weight I hadn't noticed before. The same walls that had once echoed with the sound of us, of her laughter, the kids' voices, the small, mundane sounds of a life that no longer seemed real. I walked into the bedroom. The bed was still made, but the absence of her felt like it was pressing down on the sheets. The space beside me in the bed was untouched. I reached out, brushing my hand across the empty space where she used to be. The coolness of the fabric felt sharper, more pronounced. I closed my eyes for a moment, but the image of her, her back turned as she walked away, lingered. It felt like the room had swallowed her, and now it was all just nothing. I stood there for a while. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel. The silence of the house seemed too loud, almost suffocating. The closet door creaked as I pulled it open. It was a sound I had heard countless times before, but now it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I ran my hand along the inside of the closet, past the jackets, the shoes we had never worn, the clothes that used to hold memories of trips we never took. There was a strange emptiness in each item. Each one felt like it was mocking me. Each one felt like it was mocking me, like I was the one left behind, to hold on to the remnants of something that had faded away. I reached up and started pulling down the boxes from the top shelf. They weren't packed in any particular order, just things we had accumulated over the years, photographs, mementos, gifts we had exchanged. I hadn't realized how many things we had, how many small moments we had stored away in corners of the house. Each box felt heavier than the last. I tried not to think about what was inside, but my hands trembled just a little as I sorted through the things. I could hear her voice again, soft and distant, as if she were standing right next to me, asking me why I was doing this. But she wasn't here. She hadn't been here for hours, and I hadn't even stopped her. I came across the photo album. It was sitting near the bottom of the pile. Wedged between an old scarf and a box of keepsakes from the kids' birthdays. I opened it slowly, the pages worn with time. The first picture was from our wedding day, her smiling, her hand in mine, the sunlight catching her hair. We were both so young then, so full of hope. I paused, staring at the photo. My thumb traced the edges of the picture, but it didn't feel like I was touching anything real. The weight of the moment settled deep in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to turn the page. The thought crossed my mind, clear and sharp. I can't be the man I was. I couldn't be the man she thought I was anymore. That version of me, the man who held her hand, who made promises, who was part of a family, it was gone. And somehow I knew I had let it slip away without ever meaning to. The weight of that realization settled in, slow and heavy. She had left without a word, without a fight, and here I was, staring at the fragments of a life that no longer belonged to me. I set the photo album aside, the pages still open to the picture of us. The room felt colder now, the light outside beginning to fade. It wasn't the warmth of the sun dipping below the horizon that made the room feel dark. It was the quiet, the absence of everything that had once been familiar. The boxes were stacked in the corner now, some of them were halfway packed, some still untouched. I knew I should finish, but it didn't feel important anymore. What was the point of packing things away when the life that had lived in them was already gone? I glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands were moving just like they always did. Time kept moving forward whether I wanted it to or not. But in that moment, time felt like it had stopped, like everything was suspended in the space between what I had known and what I would have to figure out next. I walked back to the living room, my feet dragging slightly across the floor. The house was empty, but it still felt like it was waiting for something. Like it was waiting for her to come back, for us to pick up the pieces of what we had. I sat back on the couch, my hands folded in my lap. The silence pressed in around me again, thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of the empty space beside me, the place where she used to sit. The cushions, still full from where we had sat together so many times, seemed to call out to me. But the weight of everything I hadn't said, everything we hadn't said, made it impossible to move. There was no fight, no argument, just her walking out and leaving me here with all of this. It was as if she had already made her decision a long time ago, and I was just the last to know. The house felt colder now, the evening light dimming as the air outside chilled. I sat there for what felt like hours, my eyes focused on the empty walls. The sound of the refrigerator was gone now. The silence was all-encompassing. I reached for the phone on the coffee table, but then I stopped. There was nothing left to say. The message had been clear, and it didn't need to be spoken again. So I set the phone down, my fingers still lingering on the surface of it. I didn't reach for it again. There was nothing more to ask. There was nothing more to hold on to. The door opened quietly in the distance. I heard the sound of the wind outside, soft against the trees, but nothing else. It felt like the house was holding its breath. It was waiting, but it wasn't waiting for her to come back. It was waiting for something I couldn't name yet, something that would come but not right now. I closed my eyes, my mind still drifting over the echoes of the life we once shared. It was all slipping away, quietly, gently, as if it had never really been mine to hold in the first place. And in the silence, I let it go. The front door opened with a creak, a sound that used to mean the end of a busy day, the sound of her coming home. But today it felt different. It felt like it belonged to someone else. I watched from the window as the first buyer pulled up, his car engine humming low against the silence of the street. He didn't look at me, just walked to the porch like he knew exactly what he was there for. The air was thick, heavy with the stillness that followed her departure. Kang, I stood by the door, my hand resting on the cold wood, and I didn't move. He knocked twice, hard, like he was trying to fill the space between us, and I opened it. He didn't say anything, just nodded, holding out a wad of cash. I motioned for him to follow me into the living room. The couch that once hosted Sunday afternoons, where we'd argue over trivial things or sit in comfortable silence, was now bare. Just a frame with the faint outline of where we'd sat. And he didn't ask questions about the life we had here. He didn't need to. He picked up the couch, looking it over, then walked straight out with it, the door banging shut behind him. The next few hours passed the same way. People came, took things, paid in cash. The antique lamp she always liked, the dining table where we'd eaten too many dinners in silence, and the kitchen chairs where the kids had learned to sit up straight. All of it was taken. The floors beneath each space felt colder now, like they, too, were empty. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence again. A message from her? I looked at it for a second, then set it back down on the counter. The screen glowed, but I didn't reach for it, not now, not today. I moved through the house like a ghost, barely touching the walls, barely letting the air in. The floors creaked beneath my feet, but it was a sound that didn't belong to me anymore. It was just the house, reminding me that everything once belonged to us. I passed the hallway where the family photos hung, their edges curling with time. My fingers brushed the frame of one, but I stopped myself before I lifted it. I couldn't look at us right now. I couldn't look at the person I was before this moment, the one she used to look at with warmth in her eyes. I wasn't him anymore. I had erased him. The house was emptying out piece by piece, like I was too. The absence of furniture was starting to feel like freedom. It wasn't a rush. It wasn't immediate. It was slow, almost like shedding skin. Each item that left made me feel lighter, almost like I was disappearing along with them. When the last of the buyers finally left, all that was left in the house were the walls, and the quiet had settled in thick and heavy, almost suffocating. I sat down on the floor of the living room, in the exact spot where the couch had been. There were no cushions left to lean against. The floor felt harder than it used to. My back ached from sitting on the bare hardwood, but I stayed there, listening to the house settle into its emptiness. KK. The phone buzzed again, another message. From her. I glanced at the screen and then turned it over. I couldn't read it, not now, not today. The silence was louder than I remembered. It was like the walls were closing in on me, each one a reminder of what I had once known and what I was trying to forget. I walked into the kitchen, where the sink had once been piled high with dishes, and the air smelled of whatever she'd been cooking the night before. Now it was just quiet. The light from the afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the counters. I ran my hand over the surface where the dishes used to sit. The spot felt colder than it had just a few hours ago. And I thought about the things I had packed away earlier, the wedding album, the letters, the little trinkets that held the weight of all the years we'd spent together. But I hadn't packed them. I had left them in the boxes untouched. I didn't want to face them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. There was a strange kind of peace in the absence of things, in the open spaces where once everything had been. The house seemed like it could breathe again, as if the weight of all the things we'd accumulated had kept it from moving, from living. I sat down at the kitchen table, the chair cool beneath me. The house was empty, and yet I felt like I was the one who had been emptied out. There was no sound, no hum of the refrigerator, no voices calling out to me, just the faint rustling of the wind outside. I could feel it in my bones, the emptiness of this place, of everything. But as the hours wore on, that emptiness started to feel less like a loss and more like a freedom I didn't know I had been waiting for. I didn't know if this would last, this feeling of being free from everything that had once weighed me down. The silence pressed in on me, but it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like the beginning of something new. Maybe it was the relief of not fighting anymore, of not being part of someone else's plans. Maybe it was just the quiet finally settling in around me, letting me breathe again. And I didn't know if I could really erase the past. I didn't know if it was possible to let go of everything that had been so deeply ingrained in me. The love, the pain, the everyday moments that made up a life. But for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of it lift. Not all at once, but in small moments, in empty rooms, in the slow, deliberate act of letting go. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my own body. I looked around at the empty rooms, each one now just a shell of the life we had once built together. The silence was louder now, but I didn't mind it. It wasn't crushing me anymore, it was just space. Space to fill with whatever came next. I walked back into the living room where the last of the buyers had taken the last of the things. The space felt bigger now, wider. I sat back down on the floor, staring at the bare walls. The house was quiet, but I didn't feel alone. Not anymore, not in the way I used to. I turned the phone over again, but I didn't look at it this time. I didn't need to. The sound of the wind outside was soft against the window, the world moving on without me. But I was still here, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The evening sun filtered through the window, casting a soft, golden light across the empty room. The dust motes danced in the air, small, silent reminders of the life that had once been. The house felt lighter now, almost weightless. There were no pieces left to move, no furniture to arrange. And the walls stood bare, holding only the echoes of the days we had spent here, the quiet moments that had slipped through my fingers without me realizing it. I stood at the threshold of the living room, my hands resting on the empty windowsill. The silence was thick, suffocating almost, but not in the way it had been before. It wasn't painful anymore. It was simply empty. The kind of silence you find at the end of something that was never meant to be broken. The last box was packed. It sat by the door, its contents sealed inside, things that belonged to someone else now, things that had belonged to us. The house was nearly barren, just shadows and dust where our lives had once been. I ran my fingers along the edge of the box, but it didn't feel like anything. It didn't feel like it was mine to hold anymore. The phone buzzed again, its vibration sharp against the quiet. I stared at it for a moment, then let it sit there on the table. I could hear the ring echoing, as if it were calling me back, pulling me towards something I couldn't name. I didn't reach for it, I didn't need to. The voice on the other end had said enough already. Words that had filled the space between us for too long. Now there was nothing left to say. The light from outside softened, the room growing darker as the sun dipped lower. The world outside was still moving, but I was still, my reflection caught in the glass of the window. A silhouette of a man who looked familiar, but somehow not the same. The reflection wasn't me anymore, it was just a shadow of someone who used to know how to belong. I looked at the door, the handle still cool from when I last touched it. I hadn't left yet. I had always thought I would know what it felt like, the moment when I would walk away from everything. But there was no clarity, no revelation, only the sound of the house around me breathing in its own emptiness. I pulled my coat on slowly, each movement deliberate, as if I was savoring the last few minutes of this life before stepping out into the unknown. The fabric of the coat felt heavier than it ever had, or maybe it was just the weight of the decision that pressed down on me. I stood there for a while, the front door, ajar, the outside world just beyond my reach. I could hear the faint hum of the wind outside, soft against the stillness of the house. There was no noise in here anymore, just the sound of my own breath, she had called. And I had ignored it, but the truth was, I had known this was coming long before she said the words. And now, as I stood here, the weight of it didn't feel like loss, it felt like release. As if, in the silence of this house, I could finally hear myself again. I glanced at the photo on the wall, one of us, smiling, arms around each other. I hadn't taken it down, I hadn't been able to. The picture still hung there, like a memory waiting to be left behind. The faces in the photo didn't look like us anymore. They were two strangers frozen in a moment that had already passed. The phone buzzed again, a final insistence. A quiet demand to listen, to answer, to break the silence. But I didn't move. The ring faded as it went to voicemail. It felt like a door closing softly, gently. I stood there for a while longer, my eyes tracing the edges of the room. The furniture was gone. The kitchen had only the faint smell of empty spaces. The walls, now bare, seemed to breathe with the memories that had filled the rooms. But they were just memories now, nothing more than that. I had once thought the act of walking away would be harder, that there would be something more to hold on to. But the truth was, walking away wasn't the hard part. The hard part was realizing you were already gone, long before the words had been spoken. I reached for the door, my hand steady as I wrapped my fingers around the handle. The outside world waited, but for the first time in a long time I felt no fear, no hesitation. The world outside was different now, but it was mine to step into. There was no turning back. I stepped out of the house, leaving the door open behind me. The wind greeted me with a quiet rush, a soft reminder that everything had changed. The house, now just a shell, stood behind me, silent, waiting to be filled by whoever came next. The street was empty, but the world still moved. I could hear the distant hum of a car, the rustle of leaves in the trees, the soft clink of wind chimes from a neighbor's porch. But for the first time, it all felt distant, like I was a part of it, but not in the way I had been before. I was just a shadow passing through. And I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I stepped out the front door, the sound of the lock turning behind me almost too loud in the still morning. The air felt different today, cooler, as if the world had taken a breath in and was holding it just for me. The house behind me was silent, and in its silence it felt like a question, one I wouldn't answer. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The way the porch, the way the grass grew along the edges of the yard, it all felt like someone else's life. I had already left it behind without a word, without a reason. The car was parked just beyond the driveway, the engine idling softly. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on my chest, but it was a quiet weight, not the kind that makes you stop. It was the kind of weight that tells you it's time to go, that the moment had already passed. Ikam. I closed the door behind me and slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my fingers. The dashboard lights blinked on, casting a soft glow over my hands. I gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time, it felt right to drive. The engine rumbled, the tires pressing against the pavement. It was just the road ahead, and it was the only thing that mattered now. I shifted into drive, and the car moved forward slowly at first, as if the world was waiting for me to make my way through it. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, as if it knew something was different today. The houses looked the same, each one standing tall and still, but I could feel the distance between them and me growing with every passing mile. Kikware. The streets were empty, the houses on either side of the road locked in their own worlds, unaware of mine. I didn't know where I was going, not exactly. All I knew was that I was leaving everything behind. My role, my place in their lives, all of it, slipping away with every mile I put between me and the house. The silence in the car was heavier than before. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. The hum of the tires against the road was enough. The sound of my own thoughts was enough. The streets grew narrower as I drove, the houses becoming fewer, the trees lining the road taller. My heart beat slower now, steady, like the rhythm of the road beneath me. I could feel the past falling away with every turn, with every new mile that stretched out ahead of me. The town in the distance was small, its outline barely visible against the horizon. There was no sign to greet me, no welcome or warning. Just the road, leading me toward it like a promise. I could already feel it. This town, with its quiet streets and empty spaces, would be mine now. No past, no expectations, just the chance to be someone new, to disappear completely. I passed the last house on the edge of the neighborhood, its porch light flickering as if trying to hold on to something. I wondered if anyone noticed I was gone yet, or had they already known. Maybe they had seen it coming, the way I'd stopped fighting, the way I had quietly begun to vanish. The small town grew closer, its faded buildings outlined against the pale morning sky. There were no busy streets, no bright lights, just empty sidewalks and a slow-moving world. The town looked like it had forgotten something, like it had been waiting for something to begin but never quite knew what. I drove past the town square, the few cars parked along the curb, their owners hidden inside buildings, doing things that weren't my concern anymore. I didn't belong here, but I didn't belong anywhere else either. I slowed the car to a stop, the engine idling, the quiet sound of the tires on the road the only thing that filled the air. The streets stretched out before me, each one leading to another empty space, another new beginning. My heart felt light, almost weightless, as if I had left all the heaviness behind me. The weight of decisions, the weight of the life I had been holding on to for so long, it was all gone now. I stepped out of the car slowly, feeling the gravel beneath my boots, feeling the air press against my skin. The town didn't know me, and I didn't know it, but I was already a part of it, part of this empty space, a part of this place where no one expected anything from me, where I could be anyone I wanted. The wind was soft, brushing past me as I stood there just outside the car. The town looked quiet from here, almost peaceful, but there was something in the distance, something I couldn't see clearly yet. The future, maybe, or just the empty road I had chosen to follow. I turned away from the car and began to walk, my footsteps quiet against the ground. The air was cool against my face, and I felt the weight of the decision I had made lift with every step I took. Each step felt like I was moving away from everything that had been, the house, the memories, the family I had once known. All of it was behind me now, like a shadow I couldn't hold on to. There was no going back, no second chances. The life I had once lived was now just a memory, fading in the rearview mirror. I had made my choice, and now it was time to live with it. The town waited for me, but it didn't care, and I didn't care about it either. All that mattered was the road ahead. I kept walking. Each step was quieter than the last. The town stretched out before me, empty and full of possibility, but I didn't feel anything yet. Not sadness, not relief, just the pull of something that was yet to come. A new beginning, maybe, or just another chapter in a story that had already been written. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The door creaked as it opened. I didn't hear the usual rush of footsteps or the chatter of the kids spilling into the house. No laughter. No sound of bags being dropped on the floor. Just silence. It felt strange, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. The light from the afternoon sun poured through the windows, but the warmth didn't reach me. The air was thick with something I couldn't quite place. I stood in the entryway, my fingers brushing against the doorframe. The space felt wrong, too empty. The air didn't carry the sounds of our life. There was no bustle, no feeling of home. Just an empty hallway, the floor colder than they should have been. They were back. But it didn't feel like they had returned to their home. It felt like they were walking into a stranger's house, one they used to know but no longer recognized. She stepped inside first, her step slow, careful, like she was trying to piece together what had happened. The kids followed behind her, their little shoes making soft thuds on the floor, but even they seemed quieter than usual. They didn't rush to their rooms or call out to each other. There was no energy in them, no eagerness to fill the space with the noise they usually brought. I watched them from where I stood, just inside the living room, a place where we had shared so many moments together. The couch that we'd sat on, the coffee table that had held the clutter of everyday life. Now it was all gone. The walls were bare, stripped of the photos that once told the story of our family. She looked around, her face unreadable, but her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She took a slow step forward, then another. Her hand reached out, brushing against the empty wall where a picture had once hung. She stopped at the center of the living room. The kids stayed by her side, their little faces confused, their eyes darting around as if they, too, were trying to figure out what had happened. Where had everything gone? Her phone buzzed in her hand. She didn't need to look at it to know it was me. She had already tried calling earlier, tried reaching me, and I had ignored every attempt. The house was too quiet now for words. She pulled her phone up, swiping through the messages I'd left unread, the ones I hadn't even bothered to respond to. Each one left unanswered, each one waiting for a reply that would never come. She held the phone to her ear, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Where are you?" she said. Her words hung in the air, but the room didn't answer. There was no response, no message from me, just the silence between us. I could see her standing there, her shoulders slumped, her fingers gripping the phone tighter. I could feel her trying to make sense of this, of me, of us, of everything we had been. But she wouldn't find any answers in the walls, in the empty spaces where the furniture had been. She wouldn't find me there. The kids didn't move. They stood still, watching her, their small hands clasped together. They must have felt it too, the absence of me, the strange quiet that had overtaken everything. They had no questions, only confusion. She checked the bank account next, her face growing more strained with every second. Her fingers tapped at the screen of her phone, scrolling through the transactions, each one telling a story she didn't want to hear. The money was gone, gone without a trace, without any explanation. I had erased myself. And with me, I had taken everything. The silence stretched between us, thick like a fog that wouldn't lift. She sank down onto the empty floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. The phone had fallen from her hand, landing softly on the ground beside her. Her eyes were closed, her face turned downward, as though she were trying to hold herself together. Didn't move. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The kids shifted, uncomfortable with the silence. One of them reached out, a small hand placed gently on her knee. She looked up then, her eyes meeting theirs, but there was no recognition in her gaze, not anymore. I had wanted to leave. I had wanted to erase everything, to leave it all behind, but seeing her like this, seeing them all like this, it made me wonder if I had done the right thing. Was this really the answer? Was there another way? But it was too late for those questions. The past had already been washed away. The life I had left behind, was it even mine to take? Or had I just abandoned it all, letting it fall apart the way everything had been falling apart for so long? She stayed like that, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders until the room grew darker. The light outside had started to fade, and the shadows in the room stretched longer, reaching into corners they never touched before. The house was empty, the air still, but there was something else there, something heavy. It wasn't just the absence of things, it was the absence of what they had all known. Kent, I stood by the door watching them. She didn't look at me. She didn't even seem to feel me there, but I could see the weight of everything she was carrying. I had left it all for her to hold, all of it. The family, the house, the memories that weren't mine anymore. The kids didn't speak. They just stood by her, their small eyes wide and full of questions they couldn't ask. I didn't answer them. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. The quiet stretched out between us, and it felt like something was ending, something important, something I didn't understand. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault. I wanted to tell her that I was sorry. But the words wouldn't come. She stood up eventually, her movements slow, as if she were moving through water. She walked to the window and looked outside, her gaze distant. The kids followed her, standing at her side, their hands now tucked into her sides, unsure. She was trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand why I had left, why I had erased myself. But she wouldn't find the answers here, not in the empty rooms, not in the walls. Cam. I walked to the door, pulling it open slowly. I didn't look back as I stepped out. I didn't need to. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, slicing through the quiet morning. It wasn't the first time it had rung today, not even close. The sound felt different, like a broken rhythm. It was almost as if I was listening to it from a distance, but it kept pulling me in. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared our mornings, our meals, our lives. The same table now felt like a stranger. The coffee cup in my hand was cold, untouched for too long, but the steam had long faded. I stared at it, letting the silence fill the space between each ring. She had called again and again. I had let it go every time. The sound of the phone on the other end was like a ghost in the house, haunting every corner. It had become familiar, but now it felt like a weight in my chest. I could hear her voice from the last message she left me. "Where are you?" I hadn't answered, but I could hear the cracks in her voice. The words were soft, but they had weight, too much weight for someone who had left everything behind. The house was empty now. Even the noise felt quieter than before. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. But there was nothing coming. She moved through the house in a kind of haze, like she was walking in a dream. There was a frantic urgency to her every step, but the world felt too still for her to make sense of it. The silence pressed in on her thick and heavy. She was calling everyone now. First, his friends, then his co-workers, and then the police, each call more desperate than the police, each call more desperate than the last, but each one bringing no answers, just more silence. The phone calls left her empty, the sound of the voice on the other end always the same. "No, we haven't heard from him." She hung up each time with the same vacant look in her eyes, the hollow feeling that came with not knowing. She sat on the couch, her hands clenched in her lap. I could feel her thoughts swirling around, but she didn't speak them. She didn't need to. Her mind was replaying everything, the last conversation, the last few days. She kept asking herself the same questions again and again. Was there something she had missed? Something she could have said to make him stay? She ran her hands through her hair, letting the strands fall back into place. Her face was drawn tight with worry, with confusion. It was clear she was searching for some clue, something she could hold on to that might explain this. But all that was left was the weight of the silence. I watched her from the kitchen, my heart heavy in my chest. I didn't know how to explain what had happened or why. I didn't even know if I could. It felt like the last thing I needed to do was give her answers. The emptiness in the house matched the emptiness in her eyes. It was growing larger by the minute, creeping into the corners of her mind. I saw it even in the quiet of the room, the way she glanced at the door, her gaze lingering there, as if she expected him to walk back through it. But it wasn't happening. He wasn't coming back. She stood up suddenly, walking to the window. The curtains moved slightly, the light from outside spilling across the floor. She didn't notice. She was looking out at the world beyond, her fingers pressed against the cool glass. She was looking for him, waiting for him, but the world had moved on without him. I could hear the steady hum of the street outside, the faint sound of a car passing by. Everything seemed to be moving forward, yet she remained rooted, trapped in the quiet. The world outside was busy, alive, but inside this house everything stood still. She reached for the phone again. Her fingers trembled as she dialed his number once more, but this time the call went straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. She stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand. as if willing it to ring, willing him to be there. But there was nothing, just the quiet. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand dropping to her side. She didn't speak, but I could see the weight of it in her face. The phone calls, the unanswered messages, they were all building up inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something. Something important, whether thou stopperying menabrinien. Something important. Something that might explain why he was gone, why he had disappeared without a trace. The thought haunted her, the idea that maybe she hadn't been enough, that something she did or didn't do had led to this. She wasn't sure if she was looking for answers. She wasn't sure if she was looking for answers, or if she was just trying to find a way to understand the silence that had taken over her world. The house was colder now, but she didn't notice. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the floor. The silence that had settled in was no longer peaceful. It had become something else, something heavy, something that pressed in on her with every breath. She walked back to the center of the room and stopped. The weight of it all hung around her like a cloud. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, she glanced at the front door. She had to make a choice now. A choice between staying in this house, this empty space, or stepping out into a world that no longer made sense to her. The silence was louder now, but she didn't move, not yet. There was still something holding her here, something that made her want to believe this wasn't real, that he would come back, that he hadn't really left. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of his absence settled in. She took a deep breath and looked around the empty room again. The walls seemed to close in, but she didn't fight it. She had no fight left in her. There was only the quiet. I watched her, my own heart heavy with the same confusion, the same unanswered questions. What had happened? How did we get here? And what happened to the life we had built together? I stayed still, my eyes fixed on her. The distance between us felt vast, but I couldn't reach her. She was lost in her own thoughts, a prisoner to the silence that had become the space between us. She reached for the door, her hand resting on the knob, but she didn't turn it. Instead, she let her fingers linger there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to shift, that for Dasak, for some small sign that it wasn't too late. But nothing came. She stood there, motionless, just for a moment, before letting go of the door handle and stepping back. The quiet stretched on, unbroken. She wasn't ready yet. The car's engine hummed low, its steady rhythm in contrast to the stillness outside. The road stretched before me, empty but for the occasional weathered sign and the distant hills rising and falling in the horizon. The town had appeared in the rearview mirror, quiet, small, nothing like the place I'd left behind. The world here smelled different, cleaner, almost like it had just woken up. I drove through the streets with no destination in mind, just the motion of the car, the soft whirring of the tires against the road, and the space between me and everything I had known. The sun was low now, casting a pale light over the buildings, their faded paint and crumbling edges blending into the muted landscape. It was all so distant, so far removed from what I had left. The house was just a few blocks off the main street, nothing fancy. The paint had chipped in places, the yard overgrown, but it was empty, unmarked, no expectations, no history. When I stepped inside, the air felt cool, even with the sun lingering on the horizon. There was nothing to mark it as someone else's, nothing to suggest it had ever belonged to anyone. I set the bag down by the door and looked around. The floors creaked beneath me, but I didn't mind. It felt like it was still waking up, just like I was. The rooms were bare, but that was the point. There were no remnants of a past I didn't want to face. No photographs on the wall, no furniture to remind me of the life I'd walked away from. The emptiness wasn't sad. It was freeing. I walked into the kitchen, running my hand along the cool countertop. The light filtering through the window felt new, clean. It was like I had stepped into another life, one where I could begin again. The silence in here was different, the kind that made room for possibility. But as I breathed it in, a small ache formed deep in my chest. The weight of my decision, of everything I had left behind, sat there, heavy but unspoken. I pulled a chair out from the small dining table and sat down, leaning back and letting my hands fall into my lap. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but I didn't mind it. The empty room seemed to echo the emptiness I had inside. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with all this space. For the first time in a long time, there were no demands, no expectations. I wasn't a husband, a father, or even a man trying to fill a role. I was just me. But even in that, something felt missing. The day had started to fade outside, the light dimming and the air cooling. I stayed in the chair, listening to the house settle. The weight of my choices lingered like the dust in the corners, slow and silent. The town was small. I didn't know anyone here, and I was fine with that. The people who passed by on the street didn't know me, my name didn't matter. No one would ask about the life I left behind, and I didn't have to explain anything. There was a certain peace in that anonymity, but it didn't come without a cost. There was freedom in being forgotten, in starting fresh, but every time I thought about what I had done, about severing ties so completely, the freedom felt less like a gift and more like an emptiness I couldn't fill. I had walked away from everything, the life I had built, the family I had promised to love. But in doing so, I had become someone else, someone who had no past, no future, just the slow passage of time in this quiet town. I walked to the window, my hand resting on the cold glass. The street was quiet now, only a few cars passing by, the soft hum of the world outside. I wasn't a part of it, not yet, not in any way that mattered. But that was the point, wasn't it? To become someone I didn't recognize, to leave the man I had been behind, to shed the weight of all the expectations that had built up over the years. I was free, but the question lingered. How does freedom feel when it's built on the ruins of everything you've known? I turned away from the window, walking slowly back into the living room. The walls were still bare, the floor creaked under my feet as I moved. There was a strange comfort in the emptiness. There was a strange comfort in knowing that no one would walk into this space and expect anything from me. No one would know who I was. The weight of my choices still hung heavy in the air, but for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an invitation to live, to breathe, to do whatever came next without the ghosts of the past haunting me. I sank into the chair once more, my hands resting in my lap. The house felt like a part of me now, just as much as I was a part of it. But the emptiness didn't scare me anymore. The past was gone, left behind in a house that no longer existed, and I was free to move forward. Even if I didn't know where that path led. I stayed there for a long while, watching the evening darken the windows. The silence around me wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. I was still, and in that stillness I could hear myself thinking for the first time in a long while, and for the first time I didn't need to answer. The phone rang again, but this time I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. It had been days since he left, days since I last saw his face, heard his voice. But the house, his absence, kept calling me back over and over, pulling me in even when I didn't want to listen. I stood by the window, staring out at the street. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the empty road. The world outside seemed to keep moving, but inside this house, everything had come to a halt. The silence in here was different now. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I once knew. It was a waiting kind of quiet, like something was still unresolved, like something was missing, but I didn't know what. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I should have seen, something I missed. I walked into the kitchen, the soft creak of the floor beneath my feet echoing in the silence. The coffee cup was still on the counter from this morning, untouched. I ran my finger along the rim, feeling the smooth ceramic cold against my skin. I hadn't had the energy to make a fresh pot. I didn't feel like drinking it. It was all just still. Too still. I had spent the last few days reaching out, calling everyone he knew, friends, co-workers, even his old neighbors. Each time the answer was the same: no, we haven't heard from him. Each conversation had ended with the same quiet dread settling over me. His friends hadn't seen him. No one had de palpashterstapap the bank accounts bows. No one had badge. I checked the bank accounts again. Nothing. His cards hadn't been used. His phone remained off. No trace of him anywhere. His disappearance wasn't like someone just leaving for a few days trying to find some space. This was deliberate. He had planned it, so he had planned it. But why and how? I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the blank screen of my phone. My finger hovered over his number, but I didn't press it. What would I say? Where are you? I had already asked that in my messages, and each time I asked, I only received more silence in return. The question circled in my mind like a bird waiting to land. What did I miss? I walked through the house again, my footsteps light against the floorboards. I passed his old chair by the window, the one where he would sit after work, staring out at the garden. It still felt warm, like he had just gotten up. I reached down, brushing my hand over the armrest. I half expected to feel him, to hear him say something about the weather or the news. But there was nothing, just the empty space, waiting. I checked the small drawer in the kitchen where he kept his keys, his wallet, the things he always carried with him. It was empty now. I felt the absence of those items like an ache in my chest. He had taken everything except the silence. The silence was still here, thick and constant. But I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for something that might never come. The phone rang again, but this time I answered it. It was his best friend Rick. I had called him earlier, hoping maybe he knew something more. But when I picked up, there was only silence on the other end. "Hello?" I said softly. "Hey." Rick's voice was heavy, quiet. "Any news?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "No, nothing. I've called everyone, his work, his family. No one's heard from him." And Rick paused, and in that silence, I could hear his breath, deep and uncertain. "You think he's, gone?" I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me. I stared at the empty kitchen, as if waiting for an answer to appear on the walls. "I don't know. He's just gone, like he planned it. There's no trace. He's erased himself." We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his absence settling between us. The question lingered. Why? But no one had an answer. Not Rick, not the friends I'd called. The friends for Frisch, not the friends I'd called. Not even me. I spent the next few hours pacing the house, trying to fill the silence with anything, checking the windows, checking the back door, as though something would have changed in the last hour, the last few days. But nothing changed. The house remained as it had been, and I, too, remained as I had been, frozen, waiting for something to move. I thought back to the last conversation we had. It was mundane, ordinary even. There was no sign of this, no hint that he had planned to disappear. He had smiled at me that morning, kissed the top of my head, told me he'd be home late. It wasn't until the night that everything changed. The note was short. "I'm sorry, I need to go." Words had haunted me ever since. The wind picked up outside, rustling the trees, and the sound reached me through the cracks in the window. It was the first real noise I had heard in hours. The house was so still that even the wind felt like a disruption. I opened the window slightly, letting the cool air seep in, and I leaned my head against the frame, staring out at the fading light. Where was he? I stood there for a while, just listening to the wind, feeling the cool air on my skin. The weight of his absence was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the house had become a shell of what it once was. The way I had become a shell of who I had once been. And I turned away from the window slowly, my feet carrying me back into the kitchen. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep chasing shadows, trying to find answers that weren't there. I sat back at the table, letting my hands rest in my lap. The phone sat in front of me, still silent. I thought about all the calls I had made, all the messages I had sent, and I thought about the life we had built together, the way he had just walked away from it. How could someone just leave everything behind? But maybe the bigger question was, how do you go on when someone disappears like that? I didn't have the answer, and maybe I never would. The house was quiet again, the sound of the wind fading as the night settled in. It wasn't peaceful, not really, but it was all I had now. I looked at the door, wondering if I would ever feel him walk through it again, or if, like everything else, he had simply gone. The mail had been sitting on the counter for hours, the pile growing quietly beside the empty coffee mug. I hadn't bothered with it, not really, but as I reached over to grab it, something caught my eye. A small envelope, wedged between the usual bills and flyers. It wasn't anything special, just plain white paper, no markings except for a faint postmark in the corner. I hesitated for a moment before tearing it open, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it slowly, the creases crinkling in the silence. There was only one line written in the middle: "You won't find me. I'm already gone." I stared at the words, the ink blurry for a moment as my eyes struggled to process them. It was as though the room around me had gone still, holding its breath. The letter was postmarked from a town far away, one I didn't recognize, and there it was, his message, his final words. I sat down, the letter in my hands, trying to understand it, trying to understand him. The weight of it settled on me like a stone in my chest. He had made his choice. He had already gone without explanation, gone without a trace. The silence pressed in on me, the words echoing in my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to read them again. I didn't need to. They were simple, clear, final. He was gone. But even so, something lingered. A question I couldn't escape. Was it my fault? Was it something I had done or said that drove him away? Or was this his decision, his alone? I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. The world around me felt smaller now, the walls closing in just a little. I wanted to shake the thought, but it clung to me. The mirror in my mind, reflecting all the moments I should have seen, the words I should have said, the things I should have done. But the truth was, I couldn't have fixed this. Not now. I stood up and walked to the window, my fingers still clutching the letter. The light from the late afternoon sun was soft, casting long shadows on the floor. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, but it felt so distant, so far away. The world felt separate from me, as though I was observing it through a window, but not really part of it. His absence had carved a hollow space in my chest, a space that seemed to grow with every passing hour. I didn't know if it was the loss of him that hurt the most, or the fact that I would never have the answers. I would never understand why. The house was empty again, the silence too loud now. The letter sat on the kitchen counter, its presence heavy in the stillness. I kept thinking of his words, "I'm already gone." They felt like they had been written for someone else, a life I wasn't part of anymore. I wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of the reminder of his disappearance, but I couldn't. I couldn't escape it. It had taken so little to break us, so little to unravel everything we had. One decision, one choice gone. And now I was left with nothing but the emptiness, trying to piece together what had happened, what I had missed. The room felt colder now, the light dimming as the day slipped away. I sat back down at the table, my eyes drifting over the room, over the things that were still here. The chair he used to sit in, the table where we used to eat dinner together. The house, the home, was now just a collection of things that no longer had meaning. I picked up the letter again, turning it over in my hands. I felt the edges of the paper, the smooth texture of the ink. It was so simple, so final, and yet it left me with 1,000 questions. Did he even think about us when he left? Or had he already been gone in his mind long before the words were written? I placed the letter down, the paper sliding softly against the wood of the table. I couldn't hold on to it anymore, but the question remained, and it would remain until I found the answer. The question wasn't just why he left, but what it meant for me, what it meant for the life I had built with him. Could you ever really leave something behind, or did it stay with you, following you wherever you went? Could someone disappear and still carry the weight of their past with them? I stood up again, walking to the door. The house was still, the silence hung like a blanket around me. I opened the door slowly, just enough to feel the cool evening air rush in, brushing against my skin like a whisper. I stepped outside, my feet moving slowly over the gravel driveway, each step feeling heavier than the last. I wasn't running away, I couldn't. There was nowhere to run to, there was nothing left to run from. But the quiet felt different now. The weight of the letter in my pocket seemed to press down on me with every step, every breath. I wasn't just searching for him anymore, I was searching for myself. The person I used to be, the one who had been part of that life, part of the story we had shared. I didn't know if I'd ever find her again, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe all I could do was move forward. And if I could, maybe, just maybe, I would find peace in the absence of the answers. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the empty road ahead of me, the silence stretching out before me like a path I didn't know how to follow. But I would follow it, slowly, quietly. Gesturi stevatin camps oibertinskat. One slowly, quietly. One step at a time. The house was quieter now. The days stretched long, like a slow, steady rhythm that no one seemed to notice but felt in every step. Walls were still the same. The floors creaked in the same places. The windows rattled when the wind picked up, but the house, it didn't feel like home anymore, not really. The children had grown quieter too. They didn't ask about him anymore. Maybe they had learned that there was no point in asking. They went about their routines, each day a little more like the last, and the absence of him settled in around them like the dust that gathered in corners. It wasn't that they didn't miss him, it was just that, eventually, missing someone became part of the background noise. I stood by the window, staring out at the garden. The flowers she had planted together with the kids had started to bloom, their colors bright against the overcast sky. But the beauty of it was muted, like everything had been stripped of its vibrance. The house had lost its warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from shared memories. The kind of warmth I couldn't quite remember how to find again. I hadn't touched his things. His clothes were still in the closet, his shoes by the door, his coat hanging in the hallway. They were all just waiting for someone to make a decision about them. But how could I touch the remnants of a life that had slipped away so easily? I turned away from the window, my feet moving without thinking, walking through the house I had once known so well. The sound of my footsteps echoed softly, but even the floorboards had changed. They didn't creak the way they used to. The house felt lighter now, not in a freeing way, but in an unsettling way. The furniture had been rearranged, the rooms freshly painted, but there was still the lingering weight of something unsaid. Something left unfinished. The kids had started to smile again, but it wasn't the same smile. It wasn't the joy that used to light up the room. It was quieter, smaller, like they were afraid to fill the space with too much sound. I checked the calendar in the kitchen. Another month had passed, just like that. Another month of moving forward, yet the days seemed to slip by without really changing anything. I opened the drawer where his keys had once sat, right next to the phone. But the keys were gone now, and the phone? Still no messages. I hadn't heard from him. No word, no sign. The silence felt colder today. My hand lingered on the edge of the drawer before I closed it again. Kokar. The kids were playing in the living room. I could hear them, their small voices muffled by the walls. They were all right, I think. They seemed all right. But sometimes, when they didn't know I was listening, their laughter sounded hollow. As if they were pretending, holding on to something they didn't quite understand. They were pretending they hadn't noticed. Pretending they didn't feel the hole left in the middle of the room, the one that had once been filled with him. I didn't know how to fill it. I sat on the couch, letting the stillness wrap around me. The house felt empty now, even when it was full of movement. The kids, the sound of the radio playing softly in the kitchen. None of it reached me in the same way. I felt disconnected, like I was on the other side of a window, looking in, but never quite a part of it. I closed my eyes for a moment, but the memory of his absence was louder than anything else. It wasn't the noise, the silence. It was the weight of him not being here. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. It startled me, the sudden sound in the quiet. I reached for it without thinking, half expecting it to be him. But no. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. The message was simple, but it stopped me in my tracks. How are you? It was a question I hadn't asked myself in a long time, a question I wasn't sure how to answer. How was I? How was anyone who had lost someone without warning, without a word? What happens when the story ends, and you're left to pick up the pieces that no longer fit together? Kekena. I set the phone back down, my fingers lingering on the screen for just a second longer. I didn't know what I was waiting for, a call, a letter, anything. But the days kept passing, and each one seemed to blur into the next. Life continued, but it wasn't the same. It never would be. I walked into the kitchen again, the smell of the coffee still lingering in the air, even though it had long since cooled. The clock on the wall ticked, each second heavy in the stillness. I wondered if he was thinking about me, about us. Was he remembering the way we used to be, or had he moved on completely, leaving it all behind like it was nothing? The question lingered as I leaned against the counter. What happens to someone when they sever ties so completely with everything they once knew? With everyone who once knew them, he was free now, I guess, free to live a life unburdened by the past. But what about the rest of us? Were we free too? Could we move on? Could we fill the space with something that wasn't him? Or were we bound to carry his absence with us forever? The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the room. I stood by the window once more, watching the colors fade in the sky, the world outside moving on without us. The kids had gone to bed, the house quiet once more. It felt like a pause, a moment of stillness before the next chapter. And I stood there for a long time, my hands pressed against the cool glass. The questions I had couldn't be answered, not by me, not by anyone else. But as I turned away from the window, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was acceptance, or maybe it was the quiet resignation of knowing that some questions would never be answered. The story had ended, and there was no going back. But the people who were still left behind, did they get to move on too? I didn't know. But maybe someday I would.